Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
My grandfather had a saying, my dad's dad, who came to the United States from Croatia. He had a saying that was passed on to me from my father. My grandfather spoke very broken English. I could catch things like "get out of my chair" and money, and him handing me money. But anyhow, the saying went, there's never been a horse that hasn't been rode, and there's never been a cowboy that hasn't been throwed. And I get it. Throw's not a word, but go with me here. It works for the saying. But as was explained to me by my father, and it usually had to do with being bullied or bullying other people, or someone having the upper hand, is that in every situation there are situations where you can have the upper hand, but there's nobody out there that always has the upper hand. There's never been a cowboy that hasn't been throwed. No cowboy successfully rides every horse, and there's not a horse out there that can't be broken by somebody. And stick with me here. I'm going to come back to this, but what I want to touch on today is the imposter syndrome. And we've touched on this before. I touched on it in episode 154, which actually came out in March 3rd of 2020, called Overcoming Imposter Syndrome. And this will be we'll have a similar title, stumbling with my words today. And then I did an interview back in, it was actually earlier this year. I did an interview with Michelle Molitor, and we talked about the imposter syndrome, and she works with a lot of people who, have crushing self-doubt about themselves, and that's really what the imposter syndrome is. So I've touched on the imposter syndrome before, and to be honest, when I talked about it the first time, I kind of, I'm rubbing my hands together, like I'm washing my hands of this. I've hit on the imposter syndrome. I'll never touch on it again. But the reality is that I'll probably talk about it again as I'm talking about it here today. If you have the opportunity to read Amy Cuddy's book, Presence, she talks about the imposter syndrome in there, and that research shows that about 70% of people out there have the imposter syndrome in one form or another. And, I don't know that the research shows that 70% total, or my theory is that at some point or another, everybody has the imposter syndrome. And it really is just stepping into a situation where you're not really sure of yourself. People get accepted to college, or they get accepted to a professional school, or take a job, and just don't feel like, well, maybe I don't belong. Maybe I just kind of snuck in. And in all honesty, in looking back, I wondered about myself in college. You don't know. You talk to other people, and they were part of the National Honor Society. We didn't even have National Honor Society. I had no idea what they were talking about. Maybe my high school didn't cut it. But then you come to realize that, they're not any smarter than you are. There was a society they had, or an organization they had, they got to take part in, and you didn't necessarily have that. And so I kind of felt it in college. Well, maybe I don't belong, and then I started doing well in college. And it's like, well, maybe I've just been lucky. Maybe people just like me. Maybe I'm not that smart. And then you get accepted to law school. Well, actually, there were as I was applying for law school, there were schools I didn't get into. I ended up going to the Ohio State University Law School, which is a very good law school. But I also applied to Yale and I applied to Michigan, which are like uber good law schools. And I didn't get in. It was crushing. And those were moments where it's like, oh my gosh, it's all coming home to roost that I really don't belong. That all these great grades and everything that I've accomplished, it's really kind of, I'm a fraud. And people are now going to find out that I'm a fraud. And then when you get off to law school, those feelings sort of continue, where you're like, okay, maybe I don't belong. Maybe, maybe my writing is poor. You know, maybe maybe I'm dyslexic. I just read this case and I read something totally different in it than other people sitting around the room read. And all these things really kind of play into using the title of Amy Cuddy's book, into your presence. Because if you don't feel like you belong, you're not going to lean into what your true self is about. And that's really kind of what Michelle Molitor gets into, is helping people crush their self-doubt and to realize that they belong. And so I had those feelings in law school, and and then I went off and got a job at what is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was called Coopers and Lybrand at the time. I was a tax consultant, not technically an attorney, but a consultant. And I had kind of the same feelings, like, wow, yeah, I did well in law school. I got decent grades in tax classes, got an MBA. I understand accounting. But man, I don't know that I'm as sharp as some of these people. Some of these people sat for the CPA exam and passed it the first time. It's taking me 3. And when I say 3, I mean 3 hard-fought, study like crazy to get past the CPA exam. Maybe I don't belong here. And all along, you're getting raises and you're getting promoted and you're getting pats on the back, and you're kind of wondering to yourself, man, maybe I don't belong here. How am I fooling all these people? And you just kind of continue along. And this is my own experience, and maybe you can kind of reflect on yours. There probably are people out there who don't have any of this self-doubt. But it's less than you might think. And you would think, well, I can spot people. I know. It's like, no, people people hide it well. I think I hid it well. It just, that's part of it. Is, I mean, if you didn't feel like you belonged, and you just put it right out there, you wouldn't even apply or wouldn't take the job. And I see some people doing that. Well, I'm not really qualified for that, so I'm not even going to try. And I understand. I don't agree, but I understand. I understand those feelings. But then there are people who go ahead and apply and get the positions and feel like they don't belong. At any rate, the imposter syndrome is out there, and we all have these feelings, or a lot of people. If it's you, there are a lot of people out there who lack self-confidence, the self-belief that they belong, and they live in fear that people are going to find out that, wow, you really don't belong. You're really not that smart. And to a degree, I think it's good. I mean, it's bad, but to a degree, it's good, because let's put it this way: if you left high school and you got that job driving a truck, putting potato chips on the shelf. And I'm not demeaning any of that. But you pretty quickly climb the learning curve and you're paid an hourly wage and you're probably doing okay. But you really haven't explored your full potential. You might be happy, and if you're happy, and that's great, and that's all you want from life, that's okay. Chances are those people aren't listening to this podcast. But if you're somebody out there like me who said, you know what, high school's not enough. I need to go off to college, and I want to go off to a good college, and I want to have a major that is going to really challenge me, then you're going to have these feelings of self-doubt. Well, maybe I bit off more than I can chew. Now I've got a job, or I went off to professional school, whether it's medical school or dental school, um, and you're all of a sudden feeling self-doubt. Um, it's it, it's a good thing. I mean, you've challenged yourself, you've pushed yourself out there, but it can be a bad thing if it impairs your ability to build relationships and really be your true confident self. So I ran across an article, it was in Cyblog, and it talked about this, and one of the ways that you can overcome imposter syndrome, or remind yourself that, you know what, you really are everything. You really are something. You know, we all reach a pinnacle, right? I think of my time in public accounting, and I advanced to the manager level, and I'd done well. I had done well, gotten promotions and raises and accolades, and I think that to a degree they were sorry to see me go, because I just naturally I work hard. I work a lot of hours. I don't mind working. But I just realized that I wasn't at the level that other people were. And maybe that's imposter syndrome. Maybe it's just reality. I had friends there who could read the tax code, and really get things from it on a first reading that it might take me 5 or 6 readings to get. They understood it at a different level. And I realized that was a limitation for me. Now, where I am good is I've always been good with people. I was good there in selling work. I've been good out in private practice of law, building a law practice, building AmSpirit business connections. I've always been good at it. And so that's my strength. That's where I tend to advance. So we all have a pinnacle, but we all need to be continuing to strive. And there's a saying out there that you need to have the courage to be willing to suck at something. I mean, I want to have the courage to try something new and be horrible at it for the first time, like tying your shoe. You're horrible at it for the first time. But if you're going to be pushing yourself like that, you're going to run into the imposter syndrome. It's just plain and simple. But what this particular article talks about is what you need to do is you need to not just reflect on times where you were successful, but also maybe go back and spend some time with those people. For example, when I was in law school and I was like, oh man, do I really belong? There were a couple occasions where I had the opportunity to go back to undergrad to visit Beloit College, my alma mater. And I'd run into my professors, and sometimes they'd have me come back to talk to classes, and they were just like, wow, you're great. Oh, you're great. And in my mind, I would be like, oh, but I don't feel like I belong in law school. But they would be like, oh, you're great. You're great. And that really did a lot to kind of push me along and inspire me to kind of continue that, okay, maybe there is something here. It's just going to be hard. Law school is just going to be hard because, while you did well in school and got mostly A's and a couple of B's, everybody in law school pretty much did the same thing. And that's the whole notion. When you go off to, when I went off to my first job, Coopers and Lybrand, with all this tax background, all this accounting background, everybody had it. Everybody had it. And so you didn't get a job in that position with people who were mechanics. You got people who shared the same thing. So naturally you're going to feel like, well, maybe I don't measure up. Maybe I'm not as smart. But the reality is that you are, and a way of doing that is just going back and, go spend some time with family. They're really proud of you. And you're not deluding yourself. You're just reminding yourself that you really have come a long way. You really have come a long way. And people are proud of you, and they've seen it. You haven't, they're standing off on the horizon watching you walk this journey, watching you walk up the mountain and the ups and the downs, and they can see it. They can see all you've done. All you've really seen are your own 2 feet. You haven't seen it. You haven't seen the bigger picture. And it's easier to step back and talk to the people who've seen you on this bigger journey. And they're the ones who can remind you that, you know what, you really do belong. You really do belong. And it's important that you take the time to do these things, because it's those moments, those people in your life who can inspire you to continue on and keep going. There's always going to be moments of self-doubt, and the moments of self-doubt are just because you're having the courage to suck at something, and you'll get beyond it. You won't, if you keep at it, you won't suck at it forever. So just a little thought on the imposter syndrome and how to overcome the imposter syndrome, to find that confidence. You need to realize that you are everything that you are. You're not a fraud. There's been no mistake. You have what it takes to be where you are at, and you have what it takes to have a bright future.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.